everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a topic that touches nearly every retail business and, let's be honest, almost all of us as consumers. Cash register fraud.
It's definitely widespread.
Yeah, and we've got a truly insightful set of source materials today. There's a detailed checklist, expert insights. Just so you know, up front, this material was prepared by Yazan Abu-Ghosh, who's a certified fraud examiner working with EasyPathUni.
Right, and it builds on an original template from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. So it's grounded in some serious expertise.
Exactly. It's a deep dive into that expertise.
That's right. Our mission for this deep dive isn't just to list the problems, It's to really unpack the crucial knowledge about how these cash register schemes actually work.
Right, the mechanics of it.
Yeah, and maybe even more importantly, the surprisingly simple yet really effective strategies businesses can use to shut them down.
You're going to walk away with practical insights into the security measures that make a real difference. And you'll even see how your own actions, like as a customer, can play a role too.
Absolutely. Think of this as your shortcut, maybe, to understanding this kind of hidden world of retail fraud. From the sneaky ways it happens to the controls designed to stop it.
Stop it dead in its tracks, ideally.
Yeah, ideally. We're going to explore why seemingly small actions, both by fraudsters and, by the businesses trying to stop them, can have these huge impacts. Okay, let's peel back the layers.
Let's do it.
So our source material kicks us off by getting right to the heart of it, defining the core types of cash register schemes. It basically boils down to two main categories fraudsters seem to favor.
Yeah, two main types. And what's fascinating here, when you look at them, is how they often exploit really common customer interactions or just, the basic transaction process. Nothing super complex sometimes.
Okay, so what's the first one?
Well, the first type is what the sources call false refund schemes. So imagine this. An employee's at the register.
Okay.
And they either issue a refund for stuff that was never actually returned, and they just pocket the cash.
Wow. Okay. Just inventing a return?
Right. Or, maybe slightly sneakier, they take a real return, but they overstate the amount. Say the refund should be $20, they process it for $50, give the customer $20, and skim the extra $30.
Ah, gotcha. So it's either creating money from nothing or skimming off a legitimate transaction.
Exactly. It's all about creating cash that shouldn't exist, at least not outside the till.
So it's creating this phantom transaction to pull cash out. What's the other main way they do it?
The other big one is false void schemes. This one's a bit different. Here, maybe a register worker completes a totally normal sale with a customer, but then later, maybe after the customer's gone, they hold on to that receipt or a copy. Then they process a fictitious voided sale using that receipt information.
Okay, so it looks like the sale was canceled?
Exactly. It makes it look like the original transaction never really happened or was canceled. But the cash from that voided sale, that doesn't go back in the register. It ends up in their pocket.
So they basically erase the sale from the system and just keep the cash.
You got it. It's like it never happened, except the money's gone.
So, okay, whether it's a fake refund or this kind of phantom void, it's ultimately about siphoning off cash that should be in that register.
Right, sir.
But our source material, it doesn't just stop at defining these, right? It goes much deeper. It lays out this whole blueprint for how to catch and prevent them.
Oh, yeah, much deeper. It feels less like just a list and more like a strategic guide, like building a fortress around the cash register.
Building a fortress, I like that.
Yeah. The bulk of our source is this incredible checklist. You mentioned it, 35 critical controls.
35, yeah.
But instead of just going through them, one by one, which can feel a bit much.
It's a bit dry, maybe.
Right. Let's group these into what I see as core principles of fraud prevention. These aren't just rules. They're like the underlying ideas that make a defense really strong.
Okay. I love that approach. Breaks it down better. So what's the first principle that jumps out from these controls?
Well, the first, and I'd say probably the most foundational, is what I'd call layered accountability.
Layered accountability.
Yeah, it's about making sure that every critical step in a cash transaction has a clear owner and ideally more than one set of eyes on it.
Makes sense.
So, for example, our sources really emphasize that access to the control keys, the ones you need for refunds and voids, that should be restricted, supervisors only.
Right. Not just any cashier can do it.
Exactly. And it's not just about limiting access, it's creating a necessary bottleneck. And that bottleneck needs paperwork. All void or refund transactions must be approved by a supervisor.
Okay.
And thoroughly documented. You need copies of the original purchase receipts, the void slips, all kept on file. diligently.
That makes so much sense. It creates that audit trail, doesn't it? Like if something looks weird later, you can trace it back. See who did what, who signed off.
Precisely.
And I guess this extends down to the individual cashiers, too.
Absolutely. That's where the individual part of accountability really comes in. Each cashier needs their own separate access code for the register.
Okay. No sharing codes.
No sharing. It means every single transaction, every button press is tied directly to a specific person. There's no, oh, who was logged in then, ambiguity.
Right.
And it goes further. Each cashier should have their own separate cash drawer. Think about it. If you share drawers and cash goes missing.
It's impossible to know who's responsible.
Exactly. But with individual drawers, any discrepancies become glaringly obvious and point right back to one person. It makes it much harder to pass the buck.
Right. So it's about removing plausible deniability, making sure there's nowhere to hide, no shared blame. And I see a related idea here about the physical space itself. Let's call it physical and environmental controls.
Yes, exactly. That's a great way to put it. This principle is all about systematically just removing the opportunity for fraud.
Okay.
It's not enough to just have policies on paper. You need to make the physical act of stealing harder. Our sources highlight that access to the entire register area should be restricted just to authorized employees and supervisors.
Simple, but effective.
Yeah, it's a simple idea, but if only the people who need to be near the cash are near the cash, you immediately cut down the risk. And here's a really interesting detail the sources mention.
Oh, yeah.
Establishing a secure area for sales staff to store their personal stuff codes, bags,
Huh. Why is that so important?
Well, it isn't just about keeping the place tidy. It's actually a subtle but pretty powerful deterrent. It stops employees from easily stashing stolen cash in their personal bags, right there at the point of sale. Reduces that immediate opportunity for concealment.
Wow, that's actually brilliant. It's almost like a psychological control, removing that easy, impulsive pathway. What about the registers themselves? Any specific physical controls mentioned there?
Absolutely. The cash registers themselves need good security features. Things like robust access controls, maybe a specific management override key needed for voids and returns.
Gotcha.
And crucially, the compartment where the register tape goes, whether it's physical paper or digital storage access, that should be locked. And the key. Only management gets that.
So no tampering with the main record.
Exactly. Protects the primary trail of every single sale. And finally, something as simple as making sure the cash registers are physically set up so managers can easily see what's going on. A clean, visible workspace is just a harder place for shady stuff to happen unnoticed.
Okay, so we've built this fortress, right? Policies, physical barriers. But what happens if someone still tries to get through? That leads us to the next big principle, which feels like it's all about proactive vigilance and data analysis. This is the detective work part.
It absolutely is. This is about being proactive, not just waiting for the money to be gone and then reacting.
Right.
Our sources emphasize that things like refunds, voids, discounts, they need to be routinely looked at to spot patterns. Are certain employees suddenly doing way more refunds than everyone else? Is one particular shift showing a weirdly high number of voids? These aren't just random numbers, they're potential signals.
Red flags.
Exactly, red flags. And doing trend analysis, looking at sales, discounts, coupons, overrings for each individual cashier that lets management spot when someone deviates from the norm, even by a little bit. This kind of analysis can tell you a lot.
That's where the data becomes a really powerful tool. And that leads us right into what I'd call spotting the subtle signals, those specific little irregularities that should immediately make someone go, let's look closer.
Exactly. Because when you're looking for this kind of fraud, it's rarely one giant, obvious theft right at the beginning. It's usually these small, repeated actions that add up over time.
Okay.
So the checklist highlights things like any missing or altered register tape. That needs a thorough investigation, no excuses.
Right. Don't just assume it got lost.
Never assume. Same goes for weird gaps in the register tape sequence or gaps in pre-numbered forms used for receipts or returns. These gaps aren't just admin errors. They could be deliberate attempts to hide transactions.
I can see how easy it might be to just dismiss a missing slip as an oversight, but the sources are clear. Treat it as a potential red flag.
Huge red flag.
What other subtle signals should businesses be watching for?
Okay, here's a classic. Multiple voids or refunds for amounts just under whatever the review limit is.
Like if anything over $50 needs manager approval, they do lots of $49 voids.
Exactly. That's not random. That is a sign of a fraudster who has figured out the system's weak points and is deliberately staying below the radar.
Sneaky.
Very. The insight there is maybe don't just set limits, but maybe randomly change them or have layered reviews, making it harder for fraudsters to know where that line is.
Makes sense. Keep them guessing.
Yeah. And our sources also state, and this is crucial, an employee other than the cashier should be the one preparing the register count sheets and comparing them to the register totals.
Separation of duties.
Textbook separation of duties. It's a cornerstone of internal control. It makes sure no single person controls both the cash and the record of the cash.
Right. That trust but verify idea applied directly to cash handling. What about those no-sale transactions? They always seem a bit odd if there are too many.
They should raise questions. Transaction records need to be monitored for an excessive number of no-sale rings. Sure, you need to open the drawer sometime.
And change or something.
Right. But a really high frequency can signal misuse, maybe skimming tiny amounts or just opening the drawer for reasons that aren't being recorded.
And don't forget the digital footprint. Login and logout times for every user should be reviewed. Are people logging in outside of business hours? Big red flag.
Okay, so it's about connecting all those little data points. And that brings us to what seems like the final layer of internal checks. Independent verification and oversight.
It really is. This is where you cross-reference everything and make sure it all adds up. An over and short log for each cashier isn't just about balancing the drawer.
It's a critical daily snapshot. Consistent discrepancies, whether they're over or short, should immediately flag someone for a closer look. It could be carelessness or it could be deliberate.
And you investigate all of them.
All of them. They must be thoroughly investigated and monitored over time, not just brushed off as, oh, well, happens sometimes.
This is where I feel like the system really closes the loops. Like you mentioned, no sale receipts. The sources say those should all be accounted for, attached to the daily report.
Exactly. It's about leaving no stone unturned, making sure every time that drawer opens for a no sale, there's a documented reason attached.
Got it.
And the sources point to specific patterns to look for in those bigger reversing transactions too, like refunds and voids. Is someone doing a lot of transactions for nice round numbers?
Like exactly $50 or $100.
Yeah. That could be a fraudster tactic, makes it easier for them to keep track of how much they've taken. And here's a critical one. Look for transactions approved by a manager on days that manager didn't actually work.
Whoa, that's blatant.
Huge red flag, right? Means someone's using credentials they shouldn't be, or maybe colluding. And finally, watch for multiple refunds of the same item or multiple voids of the same sale. That suggests something is being manipulated repeatedly.
This is so detailed, but what's really interesting is that it's not just about internal stuff. The sources actually bring the customer into the picture for prevention.
Yeah, this is a really clever part of the strategy. It basically asks, how can customers become like an unwitting part of your security team?
Okay, how?
Well, the sources mention several ways, falling under what we could call leveraging the customer. It starts super simple, just posting signs at the register, asking customers to please request and check their receipt.
I've seen those signs. I never really thought of them as a fraud tool, more just customer service.
They're both. But that simple act turns every customer into a potential decentralized auditor. They're checking if the transaction was run up correctly.
Huh. Makes perfect sense. Is there more beyond just asking for the receipt?
Oh, yeah. For instance, the sources suggest randomly contacting customers who were involved in voided sales or refunds just to verify the transaction was legit.
Wow, really? Like call them up?
Yeah, or email. It's an external check that can catch ongoing schemes really fast. And of course, any customer complaints about payment errors, those need to be taken seriously and investigated thoroughly. Sometimes the customer is the very first person to spot something fishy.
That's true.
And companies can even actively encourage customers to ask for receipts, maybe by offering a small discount or a free item if the cashier doesn't give them one.
Oh, that's smart. Turns it into an incentive.
Exactly. Creates a culture where getting a receipt is expected and valued.
Okay, so leveraging the customer is one angle, but it's also about the internal team, right? Empowering them through training and awareness.
Absolutely. Managers especially need specific training. They need to watch for and identify those really subtle markers fraudsters sometimes use to keep track of the money they've stolen.
Like what?
Well, our source gives this fascinating example, an employee who kept a nickel near the register. And that nickel apparently represented $500 they'd taken.
Get out of here! A nickel meant $500.
Yeah. It sounds small, but it's incredibly insightful. It shows the fraudsters being methodical, right? They have their own little system, their own internal ledger.
Wow.
And by training managers to look for these weird little out-of-place things, these subtle markers, businesses might uncover much bigger patterns of theft. It's about learning the sort of hidden language of fraud.
That nickel story, that really sticks with you. The idea that there's this whole secret system running right under the surface. Okay, finally, our source touches briefly on controls for broader cash movements and a proactive check. Let's call it comprehensive cash movement and integrity checks.
Sounds good. Because while we focus mostly on the register itself, the same principles apply when cash moves elsewhere.
Right, like petty cash or other disbursements.
Exactly. For cash disbursements, the guidance is clear. Use pre-numbered forms, record everything, reconcile it daily.
The sequential record again.
Yes. Makes it really hard for cash to just disappear without a trace. And those forms should have space for an explanation or a code, so there's always a documented reason for every single cash outflow.
Okay, so ensuring every dollar, even outside the main register flow, is accounted for. And then to really test if all these controls are actually working in the real world, the sources recommend integrity shopping.
Yep. Basically, all cashiers should be periodically integrity shopped. You send in mystery shoppers.
Like secret shoppers.
Exactly. But focused specifically on observing ethical conduct and whether procedures are being followed. Are they offering receipts? Are they handling cash correctly? Are they following void procedures if tested?
Ah, okay.
It's a proactive way to check if the controls are actually being used day to day, if employees are upholding the standards, and to spot potential issues before they turn into major fraud. It's like a reality check on the whole system.
Wow. Okay, that was a truly comprehensive deep dive. I mean, from just asking for a receipt all the way up to trend analysis and secret shoppers, the layers of defense are incredibly detailed.
They really are interconnected.
Yeah, it's clear this isn't just about catching people after the fact, but really about building a system, that fortress you mentioned, that makes it incredibly difficult and risky for fraud to even start.
Indeed. This material makes it abundantly clear. Preventing these schemes takes that multi-pronged approach. You need the strong internal controls, the diligent monitoring, you even bring customers into it. The real insight, I think, is that every single one of these controls, whether it's a physical lock or a data report, it's designed to do two things. Reduce the opportunity and increase the perceived risk for anyone even thinking about committing fraud.
Right. Make it not worth it.
Exactly. It really emphasizes that knowledge, like what's in these checklists, is most valuable when it's actually understood and applied to build these resilient systems.
So what does this all mean for you listening in? Thinking about all these strategies, it really makes you realize just how many moving parts there are in keeping cash secure, even now when everything feels so digital.
Yeah, physical cash isn't going away completely anytime soon in many places.
Right. And this deep dive shows that handling it securely still needs this blend of technology, procedures, and just good old-fashioned human oversight. Kind of raises a final question, doesn't it, beyond all the specific controls we talked about? If you had to pick just one foundational principle that's the most critical for any business trying to protect itself from internal fraud like this, what do you think it is? Is it building trust, or is it really about constant, diligent verification? Something to chew on.